Good Gamonad. Welcome back to the pipeline. Absolutely thrilled for this episode. We have Logan, managing partner at Frictionless, and Kevin joining us once again to co-host. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Good monad.
Thanks for having us, Danny. Pumped for this one.
Yeah, it should be good. I think it's a long time coming. Typically love to start off with an introduction and guest background for anyone who somehow is not aware, haven't encountered Logan either in person or on the timeline. Logan, would love to hear a little bit about your background, anything you'd like to share.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. Big fan of what you guys are ultimately building and appreciate the podcast. I think I started my podcast journey probably like a year and a half ago, not knowing what the hell I was doing and just wanted to talk with interesting people. And I found that it is really a life hack to just talk with cool people for extended periods of time. So excited the Monad community is carrying the torch there. But happy to dive into a little bit about myself. I started my career out in Silicon Valley, ultimately ended up at Tesla, where I was spearheading the supercharging network on the software side. And I love Tesla. I thought they're building really great products and wanted to learn about how they kind of think about the world, but also had one foot in the crypto sphere. And personally got involved with Ethereum in 2017, but fell a little bit out of love with it when I started paying $1,000 for gas fees in the bull market of 2021. And started just looking at alternative ecosystems, really focus just on scaling the industry, because I think right now what I'm really excited about is just new infrastructure, including Monad, that will actually onboard, I would say, the majority of the world. Low transaction fees, high throughput, unique application. I think it's really what the industry needs to kind of be pushed past the phase that we're in today and a little bit stuck at. And so started Frictionless Capital to focus on kind of these new infrastructures, the high throughput blockchains, as we like to say. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, I know we talked, I want to say a year ago, last summer, before Solana had its like historic run that it's had for the last year. And a lot of the things that you were pushing was like, look, if you want more people to use crypto, if you have some optimistic view of where crypto is going as an industry, there's going to be more daily active users. Scaling is extremely important. Like, we can't support it right now. But really the take was like, we can support it via Solana. Like, Solana is kind of the best way to do that. But it was very contrarian at the time, right? It was like, you reason from first principles. This makes a lot of sense. It's okay if other people don't see it right now, because I know that that's the way that the industry very likely will grow. And you were certainly right? Like you were kind of making these calls, like yelling from the rooftops at the bottom that this is an important part of the industry. And I really respected that, right? I think it was like, at the time, it was not a very popular take, right? There wasn't a lot of on-chain activity. So the tide wasn't really out for things that weren't scaling. But you were saying it was very important. Now, obviously, there's much more activity. Scalability solutions are kind of in the spotlight in crypto. So yeah, I guess would love to hear a bit about like, what is the thesis at Frictionless, and like, how did your kind of own thesis and like talking about these scalability solutions, inform that take, and kind of how did you talk to investors about it when you guys were raising for the fund, when it was a bit more contrarian and less obvious than it is today?
We were deeply unpopular for a long time, and I think for what I've really learned is either investors or kind of engineers, they need to see a little bit of traction to really believe that something is going to happen. And I don't blame them. It's kind of easier to think about the world in that way. It's like kind of like show me the money. But yeah, to your point, Kevin, Solana at that point in time, really everybody was saying it's dead. It's like the FTX chain. It's going down with Sam. And I think we were just one of the early believers that said, hey, Solana is in this unique bucket of high throughput blockchains, kind of the first. Now there are others, including Monad. But that type of technology architecture, doing kind of large data propagation or big blocks, parallel processing is going to be required. And it was kind of an out of money call, so to speak. But I think that reason why it was so deeply unpopular is the reason why we started Frictionless Capital. Because truly, like, I'm kind of agnostic, so to speak, to the technology. I just want kind of the self-sovereignty, the private key, the functionality of blockchains that we've kind of come to know and love in as many hands as people around the world as possible. And going from the low millions today that kind of do things on blockchains to ultimately hundreds of millions and then billions was just like the end goal. And when majority of the dollars were kind of flowing in one way, we took a differentiated stance that I think over time will prove to be directionally correct in these kind of high throughput blockchains. And so, yeah, we started Frictionless really, I would say, in early 2023. We were not very popular for a long time, just because our thesis really hadn't started to play out. But as the end of last year, Solana started to have its run, we actually just recently have closed our fund, which is great. So now we're focused on full-time deployment. And looking to back really interesting teams that are able to take advantage of high throughput. Obviously, we love Solana as one of the pioneers in the high throughput camp, but there are many others, including Monad, Sui, Aptos, Say. And so I think more broadly, it's just what we're looking for is when you go from these low throughput blockchains to high throughput blockchains, there are a lot of unique applications that now become possible. I think Keone has been great about preaching this about, look, you had automated market makers really created because of the limitations of blockchain architectures. But when you go from that low throughput blockchain tech stack to high throughput, now you can enable order books. And with Keone, his background at Jump, trading, really all trades, especially in size, are done on order books. And so I think what we're looking for are those unique principles and products that can be created once you go from low throughput to high throughput blockchains.
Yeah, I think, like, one thing, a lot of credit to Solana that they've done well, both, on the technical side, but also in terms of like marketing and getting the word out there, is this, slogan, if you will, only possible on Solana, speaking to like, what applications are uniquely enabled by a high throughput, high performance chain. And I think I've already gotten some insight on this next question from your previous answer, but prior to this episode was doing a little bit of homework on Frictionless and yourself, and something that really piqued my interest was a January 5th 2023 article that you guys published making the case for Solana fighting the FUD. And that was when, Solana was at $13. That was, 2-3 months after the FTX implosion. And I think there were very few people at that time and very few funds and businesses that were trying to, still make that case, even though on the technical side, really nothing had changed. But would love to, yeah, honestly, it was like, night and day in terms of narrative, but the tech remains unchanged, if not, better a little bit every day, given the amount and skill of the engineers that are working on this. But would love to hear, having been in the space for quite a while now, seeing multiple cycles and having conviction on this thesis, how do you retain that conviction through multiple cycles? Is there, a mental strategy or an operational strategy that helps with that?
The mental side, I'm still trying to master. So if you guys have any tips there, definitely let me know. I don't know if it gets harder or easier in the booms or busts. It's definitely a challenge, I would say, having close people around you and making sure you're always not on Twitter or X, and going outside and touching grass is important, as much as we like to be on the computer. But I think the reason why we held our conviction and why we started the fund again was just really because we approached the space from first principles. And I think that was really, it's a little bit cliche, and it's hard to do. It's not easy or like a fun activity. And mostly like when people like come up and say hello, like Logan, how are you? Or like don't know me and just say hello. They're like, what do you do? And I just say, normally I FUD people's bags, because frictionless and like doing first principles thinking is like not exactly fun, because you're kind of like just ripping apart people's arguments and trying to find flaws in not only their thinking, but your thinking, and trying to like really go down to like the root cause of the issue. And I think where I personally just really learned that was at my time at Tesla. And why I wanted to join Tesla, it's because I really thought Tesla made the most interesting products. For example, the Cybertruck is a really unique product. And that was really architected from first principles and challenging a lot of the assumptions in the industry. And so I wanted to join to learn about how they think about that product process. And if I could learn that thinking or methodology, I could apply that to other areas of my life. And so when I departed Tesla to really just focus on crypto full time, I did about a year and a half of just like independent research. I didn't work for anybody. I was literally just trying to come up to speed more with blockchain architecture. And to me, what I really realized is that eventually, kind of like the early days of the internet, if you go from 56K modems to broadband internet, people will always say, yes, give me faster internet connections, because I want to build more interesting applications. And to me, when I kind of realized that block space, or the amount of transactions that you can really propagate through the network, was the limiting factor, to me, it was very analogous of going from these early dial-up based systems to broadband systems. And again, like you'll go from broadband to fiber optics, and when you make that jump, every time people are like, sure, if you make transactions cheaper, if you allow me to build more interesting applications, of course I'll take that. And so I kind of came to this realization that over time, you're really going to need to scale with the more modern kind of computing best practices, with modern networking practices. And the blockchains that take advantage of that were probably going to be the ones that onboarded the vast majority of engineers and users. And so Solana, again, was just kind of the first in taking this unique approach to scaling with hardware and increasing bandwidth. And I think that really led us to the conviction that, hey, they're doing something special here. And I think it's been really cool to see now that Solana has kind of was at the forefront of this industry, but there are other blockchains really coming about. And I think a lot of those newer architectures, the Monads, the Sui, the Aptos, the Sais of the world, they're generally integrated blockchains. They're high throughput and do parallel processing. And to us, those are all the modern features that kind of these next generation blockchains will include. And I think particularly with the EVM, how much infrastructure has been built on the EVM tech stack, you're going to need to ultimately port those applications into a high throughput environment that allows you to do kind of these fee isolations, parallel processing to implement the best practices of modern hardware. And I think we're just very excited about this transition. I think we're at the very early precipice of this. Of course, there's going to be some scaling issues along the way, but I think generally this is the correct direction.
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's something that a lot of people in crypto understand. It's just they may think that a different path is like the correct way to go about scaling. One question that I think would be interesting to get your insight on right now. By profession, you are an investor, right? Being managing partner at Frictionless. One of the hardest things to get right consistently in crypto is finding projects that you should be optimistic about and finding projects that you should be skeptical of. Um, there are so many new things that just flood the crypto industry and the market all the time. And it's very hard to like find ones early that you're like, oh, this actually deserves credit, right? There is something real going on here. The team behind it can execute at a high level and like build this into something meaningful. The vast majority of the time in crypto, that is not the case, right? They're either like marketing some cool idea, but don't have the tech that will actually back it up. Or, you know, for whatever other reason, the project that they're saying it will do all these cool things, it just won't, right? Or they're not going to follow through on it, right? It makes sense to be skeptical of teams that are pushing in XYZ direction. And a lot of the ones that actually don't have the follow through are the best marketers. So people get excited about them and then they actually, you know, can't push this innovation that they're talking about. So would love to hear a little bit of your thought process on like when you initially hear an idea, like what does your like DD process look like for understanding if it's something that, oh, you know, this is all air, there's nothing backing it up, or if it's a real thing. And one anecdote that comes to mind is like when I initially joined Monad, like it was not this thing that a lot of people were excited about. Like some people were, there was a little bit of signal, but it was very much not like a consensus thing. And you were actually one of the first people I talked to, and you were like, no, this is legit, right? Like this is the truth. This is gonna, if they can really push this through, which, you know, like you believe the team could, it's going to change a lot of things. So like having that conviction in Monad early, in Solana early, understanding like how you actually go about making those decisions and kind of figuring out if something is worth time, effort, energy, or capital to put in, and kind of separating like the good projects with high potential from ones that like don't really have the legs behind it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're definitely not going to bat 100% within the blockchain crypto industry, but I think personally, a lot of funds, what I found, are not very technical. For me, what I have just enjoyed is talking with technical people on my podcast. And my podcast may be a little bit more niche because I try to get the technical co-founders to come on, kind of dissuade the marketing people to come on and get like the chief technical people to come on because they're the ones that are actually building it. And what I've really respect about at least engineers, the engineers that I do respect are very honest about the engineering trade-offs that they're making. Generally, there's not an engineering solution that will be maximally efficient at every single possible outcome. And I think for me, what I very much have appreciated is engineers that say, I'm optimizing for this specific variable. And yes, there are different ways to scale blockchains. Layer 2s can definitely scale computation and execution. To me, it's balancing kind of one certain point of view on the world with the other point of views and then relating that back to how does this actually affect users and the product side? Because I think in crypto, one of it is just like the tech, which I can nerd out on and I really love, but tech is not the end game. Tech is the starting point that allows you to build really unique products. And those products are the things that are actually going to grow the industry. And so I think at Frictionless, we look at, are they doing something unique from a technical standpoint? We obviously have some biases in this area just because we've done our homework. But what I really appreciate is when someone comes to me and they're like, Logan, you're really fucking dumb. And this is why, because your logic here and here is flawed. And you need to think about it in a different point of view or a different light and explain exactly why that logic is flawed. And to me, that is invaluable information because if someone can highlight flaws in your logic or gaps where you're missing things, you should really tell them thank you because they're helping you learn. And we have obviously done a lot of homework in this area, but we're very, very appreciative of the founders, investors, really the entire crypto community for saying like, hey, this is really dumb. You need to correct this, and this is why. So that's kind of our starting point. I think what we look for is kind of unique, like crypto-only type applications. And I think as we kind of dive deeper within the industry, there are some things that kind of highlight to us that are going to be more and more important. For example, JITO and MEV obviously has become a larger topic, and I think will continue to be not a pain point per se. It's just people will have a better and better understanding of MEV over time. And one of the companies that we recently just backed at Frictionless is called DFlow. And what they're doing here is payment for order flow. I call it kind of the yin to JITO's yang. If JITO is particularly helping on the taker side of liquidity, so allowing you to construct a block to get a certain type of arbitrage, what DFlow is constructing is helping makers provide better liquidity and better execution. And so I think it's very complementary to what JITO is doing, and I actually believe like payment for order flow is really the next iteration of kind of this MEV structure. So there's some things that we try to reason about and look out for teams building in that area. I think DFlow is going to be really in the forefront very soon. But there's other things like decentralized physical infrastructure networks that are a little bit harder to reason about, at least from like a new concept, because really they're only got created, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 years, and only really popularized in the last 6 to 12 months. But I think that category as a whole is very interesting because it's a new way for capital formation. I mean, if you look back to 2017, that was ICOs. If you fast forward to DeFi Summer, that was spearheaded by Compound and liquidity mining. And then I think, again, the decentralized physical infrastructure networks are really going to be kind of at the forefront because they enable something new. And so I think to your question, Kevin, it's not super always transparent, but I think by having a thesis, by doing the homework a little bit ahead of time, we spent a good amount of time studying high throughput blockchains. And so when Monad was like, hey, we're going to parallelize the EVM, we're going to make it high throughput, it was pretty obvious to us with the caliber of the team, with Keone, that they were going to deliver something special. And so I think it's doing the homework ahead of time as much as possible, and then when you meet the founder and the team that's building or executing in that vision, just getting back behind them with full force.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot to be said for hosting people that are technical on your podcast, especially if they're in product day in and out. And, you know, like that was definitely one of my inspirations for starting this podcast. And it's been a huge pleasure to talk with, you know, technical founders all over the map, get to learn the ins and outs of their product. But I think one thing that people who are a bit newer in the crypto space are confronted with, it's very challenging to get good, accurate information. And like you talk about, you know, you can have this thesis, and if you have the opportunity to kind of battle test that with someone who's highly experienced working on these areas day in and out, at that point it becomes easier to either validate or invalidate your thesis. But, you know, if you're newer to the space, if you're tuning in on crypto Twitter, you know, there's all sorts of media that you can consume, different takes all over the map. Do you have any advice for someone who's, you know, a bit newer in crypto communities, but, you know, wants to understand more deeply the potential impact of this tech, what's real and what isn't? How would you go about that if you were starting over from day one?
I would say everybody's wrong, and your goal is to be less wrong. I mean, even I'm wrong. Anatoly's wrong. Keone's wrong in some regards. Like, and that's okay.
Clip
like,
it.
it's human nature to be okay. To be flawed in some areas. My general advice is talk with a lot of smart people. and try to find the flaws in your thinking, because it only makes you better. And I think there is no perfect design. There is no perfect alpha well. You have to really do your homework and come to your own conclusions. What I'm excited about now is eventually we'll go past this kind of infrastructure stage that I think we're in, beyond high throughput blockchains to applications. And then it won't be about, hey, the alpha is over here. It's just going to be like, use this product, which may be a little bit boring, but like the products are the alpha. And so I'm excited that we're getting to that point, but on alpha and trying to find unique points of view, I've done, I think, the most technical podcast with, I would say, the vast majority of engineering leads in the industry, and they all have different points of view on how things will shape out. I think it's up to you, the individual, to learn from each of these people and try to synthesize, hey, I think this design decision is unique, and this should be applied to everything in the industry. I think, for example, data availability sampling and what Celestia did is really cool. It'll probably be standard on most blockchains as you continue to scale in high throughput blockchains. I think parallel processing is going to be a requirement. But like, as you can like kind of gather more and more information, just the more sophisticated you can become. But don't look to any single individual, single entity for every single information. It's some degree biased, and your goal is to be less biased and less wrong over time.
Yeah, makes complete sense. I mean, big plug there. Go listen to the Logan Jastremski podcast if you want takes from all over the map and, you know, some deep alpha from technical co-founders. But also to your point of like, you know, infrastructure first and then applications, it makes complete sense, right? It's like you see the road ahead of you. You need the rails, you need the track to be laid before, you know, a nice train can run on it. And it almost reminds me of like, you know, this is well before our time, but like early days of email or even the internet in the 1970s, 1980s. Like, you know, these things were much harder to believe in at the time, but if you did do your due diligence and kind of see that road ahead of you, it does make sense, you know, how this comes together, and ultimately you get, you know, applications and services that are replacing the old system and doing so in a much better and more efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, the early iterations of the internet was the ARPANET. You could use a command line terminal to access the internet, and then eventually you had the graphical user interface and layered on more layers of abstraction to make it fairly simplistic to access the internet and try different things. And it's kind of eerily similar to me that blockchains are going through the similar thing, but I'm just excited for products. I'm really excited to move past infrastructure, even though it is very critical, and I'm glad the amount of funding has kind of gone into it. And I'm very much a believer in these high throughput blockchains that are around today, really being much closer to the end state blockchain architecture than most people really realize today. And what that enables. So I think we're about to enter the golden era of crypto products, and very excited for the new founders, builders, the current founders, to build really great things.
I think one more modern comparison as well is like the necessary hardware requirements in like chip manufacturing for AI application. The demand for these chips has been high for a long time. The applications that have basically been built that require them have taken a while to come to market, but now they're ubiquitous, right? Everyone knows what ChatGPT is. It's not possible without like AMD and NVIDIA leading the charge there and like creating the infrastructure that allows these large language models to like actually go through and process. So like a lot of people ask where the apps are. Infrastructure is definitely a prerequisite there, right? Like you can't build something cool on top of technology if the technology isn't there yet. So I think it's like, it's kind of necessary that all of this, you know, investment of time, energy, capital into the infrastructure layer is happening now and has been happening for the last few years. to create a new design space that allows apps that require high performance and like are the next generation of consumer facing apps, like high fidelity DeFi, to exist. Like you need that one to come first, right? Like
100%.
In this case, the egg does come before the chicken.
Yeah. I mean, I like the dumb kind of analogy that I think is like directionally correct is literally going from dial-up internet to broadband, because once you do that, then you can create a whole new possibility of applications that you couldn't on the internet prior, like YouTube. I mean, sharing photos, sharing videos is just much harder when you have slower internet connection. I mean, similar, like when you have 12, 15 transactions per second, like Ethereum mainnet is doing, it's very, very difficult to do an order book when you're trying to do bids and ask on chain. But when you're doing 1,000 transactions, 10,000 transactions, and those are fractions of a penny to ultimately do on chain, a new world opens up. And so, yeah, to your point, I'm very, very excited that these high throughput blockchains are enabling unique applications. And I think broadly, the crypto industry is underexposed to them. Again, this is why we set up Frictionless Capital, because I think this is really the forefront of the industry, and will allow engineers to not only build more complex applications, but applications that actually scale.
Yeah, the new possibility of applications and the potential to scale them, I think is one of the first things that I actually heard about Monad, back probably a year or so ago at this time. And, at the time I was like, what do we need a new L1 for? Like there's plenty out there, like was kind of my narrow-minded thought, and pretty quickly heard a podcast or a video of Keone speaking. And it was like, we are trying to usher in this new paradigm of like the possibility of applications actually growing to reach scale. And everyone talks about this mass adoption phase or like onboarding the next million or billion users. But, it's very clear that we're not going to get there without the rails that can facilitate this. And I think when Monad is described these days, a helpful analogy for a lot of people to understand this is like Solana-like performance, but fully EVM compatible. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts of the like importance of the EVM in the space and what Monad is trying to solve here?
Yeah, I would say if Solana and Ethereum had a baby, it'd be Monad. I mean, doing parallel processing and high throughput. I mean, if I could go back and like rewrite history, I was leading the Ethereum kind of ecosystem, I would build it like the architecture that Monad is ultimately designing, doing parallel processing and doing high throughput. I think sometimes on Twitter I FUD the EVM, but that's particularly around the single-threaded EVM because it has the inability to do parallel processing. And I think to me that is just such a fundamental requirement of where the industry is going to be going, that it has to really be a first-class feature. If it's not, it's really going to have a hard time scaling, in my opinion. And I think obviously the world is a little bit path dependent, with Ethereum being the first smart contract platform launching, starting with the Ethereum virtual machine that has been very prolific in the first generations of application within the blockchain world. There's been a lot of time, a lot of money built in the EVM. And to me, I very much appreciate all the different layer 2 architectures out there trying to help scale Ethereum. But again, I kind of come back to the product standpoint and look at it, how could we make this experience still have the properties of scale that we have come to know and love, with kind of the blockchain aspects of self-sovereignty, self-custody, in the most simplistic user experience. And to me, the more that you integrate that technology stack into one, the more simplistic it becomes for users and engineers. Users don't have to worry about bridging from a different L2 to another L2. Engineers don't have to worry about deploying on Arbitrum or Base. they can just focus on, hey, I'm deploying on Monad, it's EVM compatible, it's high throughput, it does parallel processing, and I don't want to think about the infrastructure. I want to think about my product. And that's what I'm very excited about. Being able to go from high throughput infrastructure and that kind of just being de facto standard and allowing engineers to focus on the product. Because today a lot of application engineers are focused on infrastructure, and I'm not sure that's the best use of their time. We want product people focus on products. That's their bread and butter. And I think that's how we move the industry forward.
Yeah. So given we kind of like are making the assumption that we actually get there and allow the product folks to focus on the applications that they're building, you know, what would be most exciting to you in terms of applications that you'd see high throughput chains like Monad, like Solana uniquely enable on the horizon?
I mean, I think there is like DeFi 1.0. Obviously, the next step is like DeFi 2.0 that is like natively taking advantage of order books, making applications high throughput. I think every ecosystem initially when launch, I think it's always going to be flooded, no matter like how beautifully designed it is, because everybody's like, oh, you promise XYZ TPS and you're only doing this. And the demand does not equal the capacity. And application engineers take some time and users take some time to migrate over to that ecosystem. But you have to kind of lay the groundwork. You need the NFT marketplace. You need the borrow lend. These things are essential of any ecosystem to function and to get the retail users excited about it, to start trying out applications. I think once you kind of go from like the basic infrastructure, that's when you can start to experiment with the high throughput infrastructure. And again, I think DeFi 2.0 is going to be very important with all these ecosystems. If we truly think blockchain is going to help facilitate or move majority of money around the world, it has to integrate a lot of the traditional TradFi technology stack. I think broadly beyond DeFi, I am very excited about decentralized physical infrastructure networks, DePIN. I think they honestly have the possibility to enable, say, the first application with like 10 million monthly active wallets on chain. The earlier iterations like Helium have now expanded to personal cell phone plans around the globe, where in Miami it's $5. I think in the United States it's 20. But continuing to expand, hey, we can do something interesting in the physical world and use the back-end coordination network on crypto rails. But that is a product that we're building and serving to someone else. You don't even really have to know that it's built on a blockchain backend. You just know that the product is serving you. What else? I do think more outside of that, we still have seen fairly early... we haven't seen too much things take off in social. I think Friendtech obviously was an interesting example, Farcaster now, but it still seems relatively limited in adoption. I'm excited for people to continue those experiments on high throughput blockchains. And so more broadly, it's just like build the base infrastructure. You're on any new ecosystems, that's going to take some time to build out. And then what is the high throughput equivalent or only possible on the high throughput blockchain architecture? Because I think that's where the industry is going to move. And it's going to take a little bit of creative thinking, because what worked maybe in the EVM world in the past, it will still work on like the high performance EVM, but it will look much different than the first iterations because the high throughput blockchain enables unique capabilities.
Yeah, one idea that came from this, like obviously Solana is very well known for the only possible on Solana kind of tagline. Amazing branding and messaging, and there are a lot of apps that like truly fall into that. I do think once Mana mainnet goes live, there will be basically an addition or a supplemental where you add the AM, right? So only possible on Solana and Monad, which creates a pretty funny opossum. Like we'll definitely have some possum characters popping up in the lore. added to the Molendak and Moyaki, Chog, some of the other characters that have come naturally out of the community. So yeah, really, really excited for that. I think creating the largest design landscape for people to build cool apps is the goal right now. People often talk about crypto as having like two main use cases. One is stablecoin payments and the other is speculation. So for anyone who's building a cool app and thinks it could be high potential, right? You have users right off the bat. You have people who are going to play around, kick the tires, experiment. It's never been a better time to be looking to build something cool and new on top of crypto rails, right? And high throughput blockchains, very likely the key to unlocking some of those viral apps that will kick us off into kind of the consumer age of crypto. But Logan, I really appreciate you coming on. We have one final question that we have shamelessly ripped from the Up Only podcast, the final alpha. After hearing you talk through your thesis for at least the last year and what Frictionless Capital is built around, some people may call you Logan Alpha Jastremski after this, right? It seems like that's kind of all you have in your brain. But yeah, essentially just want to hit on like anything that you think, you've picked up along the way, something that could make the listeners healthier, wealthier, or wiser, or just give them a chuckle. Like anything that has been, something that you think is cool or crucial that maybe most people don't know about, or just, one nugget of information that you've kind of picked up along the way that you could kind of share with the listeners as the final word on the pod.
I mean, on the health side, make sure you go outside, get sun. I live in Miami for a reason. I like the sun and it helps me I think a lot better, but also working out. You cannot trade or make money if your mental health or physical health is not there. So definitely during bull markets, make sure to prioritize that. I think one thing that I've kind of more embodied is maybe from your past employer, Kevin. Do you want to make money or do you want to be right? Or maybe even extending that, do you want to be popular or do you want to make money? And I think what I've kind of come to appreciate is that the things that make you money will not always make you popular. And it's kind of been hard for me personally. I think growing up in the Midwest in Indiana, I've always, there's a lot of people that now I can kind of view as peers and within the industry. And I've always wanted to be liked. But I think within the profession, especially within investing, if you're early and right, generally that's a differentiated point of view. And just because people don't have the same opinion of you, if you do the homework and you truly believe in something, you may actually be right. It's just not popular and you need to stay the course. You should always question yourself and again, try to find new information that invalidates your thesis or someone that can articulate it better than you. But if you can't, stay the course. That has probably been one of the more challenging things that I've had to learn for the past 2 years is you're not always going to be popular, but if you're investing, make sure to do your homework and don't be contrarian to be contrarian, but if you have differentiated information, you may be right. It was funny, before starting Frictionless, I tried to join other popular venture capital funds. They all did not hire me, and I won't name names, but there are now many that are invested within Frictionless, and so it's kind of come a little bit full circle that people that told you no initially may come back around. So ultimately, moral of the story, believe in yourself and do the work.
You heard it here first. Get sun, work out, and use your own brain. Don't just follow the popular opinion. Try to reason for yourself and figure out where you might actually be uniquely positioned to make a good call that other people don't see yet. Logan, it's been an honor to have you on the show, man. We'll let Danny, as tradition, carry us out here. But really appreciate the time, dude. This was awesome.
Danny, Kevin, thank you.
Thank you. It's a massive pleasure to chat. Hope we get to do this again soon. Really love the way that you think, and I know a lot of our listeners will too. So appreciate you making the time to come on, dropping some alpha, and having a good conversation with us as always.
And I heard there may be more alpha on the Monad side of in-person podcasts. So run it back maybe in person.
Yeah, we might have to host you at HQ here, hook you up with some hats and a shirt or something, represent, maybe, swap a Monad hat for a frictionless hat. That'd be a good trade.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Looking forward to it, and thanks again. Appreciate it, Logan.
See you guys. Thank you.